The forest seemed alive with whispers of movement, but nothing appeared. Then the sound of deep, labored breaths echoed through the trees, followed by a low growl that vibrated through your chest. Whatever it wasn't moving away. It was circling. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin the story, I would like to ask for your support. Please subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is very important to me and helps me a lot. I notice that many people watch the videos without subscribing, so please support me by subscribing. It means a lot to me and will help me greatly. I count on your support. Write in the comments which city you're watching from. We'll bring stories from near you. Click the like button and let's get to the case. The SUV's tires crunched on the gravel road as Karen Langley eased off the accelerator. The dense pine forest loomed on either side, creating a natural tunnel that seemed to swallow them whole. As they rounded the final bend, the cabin came into view. A rustic two-story structure nestled against a backdrop of towering Rocky Mountain peaks. "We're here!" Karen called out, glancing in the rearview mirror at her two children, Emily, 8, and Max, 6, who were engrossed in their tablets. Her husband, Tom, stirred from his nap in the passenger seat. "Finally," he mumbled, stretching. That drive felt longer than usual. Karen nodded, a slight frown creasing her brow. It had felt longer, though not just because of the distance. There was something about the forest today, a heaviness in the air, a watchfulness that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. As she pulled up to the cabin and cut the engine, an eerie silence descended. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the faint ping of the cooling engine. "All right, troops," Tom said with forced cheerfulness, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Let's unpack and get settled." Karen stepped out of the car, her eyes scanning the tree line. A shiver ran down her spine despite the warm summer air. "Kids, stay close to the cabin while we unpack, okay?" Emily and Max tumbled out of the car, finally free from their seatbelts and digital devices. "Can we explore, Mom? Please?" Max begged, his eyes wide with excitement. Karen hesitated. "Not right now, sweetie. Help us unpack first, then we'll see." As they began unloading suitcases and coolers, Karen couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She tried to rationalize it. They were in nature after all, plenty of animals around, but the silence was unnerving. Tom seemed oblivious to her unease as he lugged their bags towards the cabin. "Hey, car," he called over his shoulder. "Can you grab the last cooler?" Karen nodded, moving to the back of the SUV. As she reached for the cooler, a loud snap echoed from the nearby bushes. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. "Mom?" Emily's voice quavered. "What was that?" Karen forced a smile. "Probably just a squirrel, honey. Why don't you and Max go inside and pick your rooms?" As the kids scampered off, Karen peered into the undergrowth. A flash of movement caught her eye, but it was gone before she could focus on it. "Just a squirrel," she told herself firmly. But her hands shook slightly as she lifted the cooler. Inside the cabin, the musty scent of disuse filled her nostrils. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the windows. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath their feet as they moved about, unpacking and airing out rooms. "Geez, it's stuffy in here," Tom commented, throwing open a window. "Karen, can you check if the back windows will open? We need to get some air circulating." Karen nodded, making her way to the back of the cabin. As she struggled with a stuck window, movement outside caught her attention. She squinted, trying to make out what it was through the grimy glass. For a moment, she thought she saw something large moving between the trees, but it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Her heart racing, Karen called out, "Tom, can you come here a second?" "What's up?" Tom asked, appearing in the doorway. Karen gestured to the window. "I thought I saw something out there. Something big." Tom peered out, then shrugged. "I don't see anything, hun. Probably just shadows from the trees." Karen nodded, not entirely convinced. "Yeah, you're probably right." As evening approached, Karen busied herself preparing dinner in the small kitchen. The normalcy of the task helped calm her nerves, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had plagued her since their arrival. She was stirring a pot of pasta when movement outside the kitchen window caught her eye. She looked up sharply, her breath catching in her throat. For a split second, she could have sworn she saw a massive, dark shape moving past. But when she blinked, it was gone. "Mom, is dinner ready?" Max's voice made her jump. Karen took a deep breath, steadying herself. Almost, sweetie. Can you tell Dad and Emily to wash up? As they sat down to dinner, Karen tried to focus on her family's chatter, pushing away the nagging sense of dread that had settled in her stomach. So, what's the plan for tomorrow? Tom asked between bites. Hiking? Fishing? Hiking? Emily exclaimed. Can we go see the waterfall, Dad? Karen felt a chill at the thought of venturing deeper into the forest. Maybe we should stick close to the cabin tomorrow, she suggested. You know, get acclimated first. Tom gave her a quizzical look. Everything okay, Car? You seem a bit on edge. Karen forced a smile. I'm fine. Just tired from the drive, I guess. As night fell, the sounds of the forest seemed to grow louder. Karen lay awake in bed, every rustle and growl making her heart race. Tom's steady breathing beside her offered little comfort. A particularly loud crack from outside made her sit up, straining her ears. Was that a growl? Or just the wind? Karen? Tom's sleepy voice came from beside her. What's wrong? She hesitated, not wanting to sound paranoid. Nothing, just thought I heard something. Tom reached out, squeezing her hand. It's just the forest, hun. Try to get some sleep. Karen nodded, lying back down. But sleep eluded her. As she stared at the ceiling, shadows from the trees outside danced across it, taking on monstrous shapes in her imagination. She must have dozed off eventually because the next thing she knew, pale morning light was filtering through the curtains. Karen sat up, feeling groggy and unrested. As she made her way downstairs to start breakfast, she tried to shake off the unease from the night before. In the light of day, her fears seemed silly. They'd been coming to this cabin for years without incident. But as she reached for the coffee pot, her eyes were drawn to the window. There, in a patch of soft earth by the tree line, was something that made her blood run cold. A massive paw print, fresh and deep, was clearly visible. Karen's hand shook as she fumbled for her phone. She needed to call the park rangers. Now, little did she know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would change their lives forever. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the dense canopy of pine trees surrounding the cabin. Karen Langley stood on the porch, clutching a steaming mug of coffee, her eyes scanning the tree line. The cool mountain air carried an unfamiliar, musky scent that made her wrinkle her nose. Mom, can we go play now? Max's excited voice broke through her thoughts. Karen hesitated, her grip tightening on the mug. Stay close to the cabin, okay? Don't go past the big pine tree at the edge of the clearing. As the kids raced off the porch, whooping with joy, Tom appeared beside her. You're hovering, Car, he said gently. What's got you so on edge? She sighed, debating whether to share her concerns. I don't know, Tom. Something just feels off. And I found a strange print in the dirt this morning. Tom's brow furrowed. A print? What kind of print? I'm not sure, Karen admitted. But it was big, really big. Tom put an arm around her shoulders. Hey, we're in bear country. It's probably just a black bear passing through. They usually avoid people. Karen nodded, trying to take comfort in his words. But as she watched Emily and Max playing near the cabin, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Deciding to investigate further, Karen set down her coffee and stepped off the porch. She made her way to where she'd seen the print earlier, Tom following close behind. There, she said, pointing to the soft earth. Look at that. Tom crouched down, examining the massive paw print. His face grew serious. That's not a black bear print, Karen. It's too big. A chill ran down Karen's spine. What are you saying? Before Tom could answer, a blood-curdling scream cut through the air. Karen's head snapped up, her heart pounding. The kids! They raced toward the sound, finding Emily and Max huddled together at the edge of the clearing, their faces pale with fear. What happened? Karen demanded, gathering them into her arms. Max pointed a shaking finger toward the tree line. We saw a bear, Emily finished, her voice barely above a whisper. A huge bear. Karen's blood ran cold. She scanned the forest but saw nothing but shadows and trees. Where? Where did you see it? Over there, Max said, indicating a dense patch of undergrowth. It was watching us. Tom stepped in front of his family. His eyes narrowed as he peered into the forest. I don't see anything now. Let's get back to the cabin, As they hurried back, Karen could have sworn she heard a low growl echoing from the tree line. She ushered the children inside, her hands shaking as she locked the door behind them. "Tom, we need to call the Rangers," she said, her voice trembling. "If there's a bear this close to the cabin..." Tom nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'm on it." As Tom spoke with the Rangers, Karen tried to calm the children. "It's okay," she soothed, running her hands through their hair. "Bears are usually more scared of us than we are of them." But even as she said the words, she didn't believe them. The image of that massive paw print kept flashing in her mind. "The Ranger's on his way," Tom announced, hanging up the phone. He said to stay inside and keep all food secured. The next hour crawled by with agonizing slowness. Karen paced the cabin, jumping at every sound from outside. The kids huddled on the couch, unusually quiet, while Tom kept watch at the window. Finally, a knock at the door made them all jump. "Park Ranger," a deep voice called out. "Everything okay in there?" Tom opened the door, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man in a ranger uniform. "Thanks for coming," Tom said, ushering him inside. "I'm Tom Langley. This is my wife Karen and our kids Emily and Max." The ranger nodded, his eyes serious. "I'm Ranger Mike Holbrook. Now tell me exactly what you saw." As Karen and Tom recounted the morning's events with interjections from the kids, Ranger Holbrook's frown deepened. "And you're sure about the size of the print?" he asked, his voice grave. Karen nodded. "It was huge, much bigger than any bear print I've ever seen." Ranger Holbrook sighed. "I was afraid of that. We've had reports of a grizzly in the area recently. They're not common in this part of the Rockies, but it happens." A heavy silence fell over the room. Karen felt her heart racing. "A grizzly? But I thought they were only in..." "They usually stick to more northern areas," Ranger Holbrook confirmed. "But this one's been ranging further south. We've been trying to track it, but it's elusive." "What should we do?" Tom asked, his arm protectively around Karen's shoulders. "For now, stay inside as much as possible," the ranger advised. "Keep all food, including trash, secured inside. If you do go out, make lots of noise and carry bear spray. And whatever you do, don't run if you see it. That triggers their chase instinct." As Ranger Holbrook prepared to leave, he turned back to the family. "I know this is scary, but try to stay calm. Grizzlies don't usually seek out human contact, just be cautious and aware." After the ranger left, a tense silence fell over the cabin. The kids clung to Karen, while Tom paced nervously. "Maybe we should leave," Karen suggested, her voice small. "Go back to Boulder." Tom hesitated. "Let's not make any hasty decisions. The ranger said it's probably just passing through. We've been looking forward to this vacation for months." Karen wanted to argue, but the hopeful looks on Emily and Max's faces stopped her. "All right," she conceded, "but we stick together, okay? No one goes outside alone." As the day wore on, the family tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. They played board games, read books, and watched movies. But Karen couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she glanced out a window, she half expected to see a massive bear staring back at her. That night, as they prepared for bed, strange noises from outside set everyone on edge. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, and what sounded disturbingly like heavy breathing. "It's just the wind," Tom insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Karen lay awake long into the night, every sound making her flinch. She couldn't stop thinking about the ranger's words. Grizzlies don't usually seek out human contact. Usually. But what about this time? As dawn broke, Karen finally drifted into a fitful sleep, but her dreams were haunted by visions of glinting eyes and massive razor-sharp claws. Little did she know, the true nightmare was yet to begin. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the horrors of the previous day seeming distant in the cheerful sunlight. Karen Langley stood at the cabin's kitchen window, watching as her children, Emily and Max, pestered their father. "Please, Dad, can we go on a hike?" "Pretty please," Emily begged, tugging at Tom's sleeve. Tom glanced at Karen, uncertainty written across his face. "I don't know, kids. After yesterday..." Karen sighed, torn between caution and the desire for normalcy. The ranger's words echoed in her mind. "Stay inside as much as possible, But they couldn't spend their entire vacation cooped up in the cabin, could they? Maybe a short hike wouldn't hurt, Karen found herself saying, surprising even herself. We'll stay on the main trail, make lots of noise, and bring the bear spray. Tom raised an eyebrow. Are you sure, Car? Yesterday you were ready to pack up and leave. Karen nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. We can't let fear rule us, right? Besides, the ranger said grizzlies don't usually seek out human contact. An hour later, the Langley family set out on the trail, each adult carrying a can of bear spray on their hip. Karen's hand kept drifting to the canister, its weight both reassuring and terrifying. Remember, kids, Tom called out as they walked. Stay close and make noise. We want any animals to know we're coming. Max took this instruction to heart, belting out an off-key rendition of his favorite cartoon theme song. Under normal circumstances, Karen might have found it annoying, but today, each shrill note was a blessed assurance that they weren't sneaking up on any wildlife. As they hiked, Karen's eyes darted constantly from tree to tree, every shadow seeming to conceal a potential threat. A snapping twig made her jump, her hand flying to the bear spray. Whoa, easy there, Tom said. Tommy, placing a calming hand on her shoulder. It's just a squirrel. Karen forced a laugh, trying to ease the tension. Right, of course. Silly me. They continued along the trail, the kids running ahead to examine interesting rocks or colorful wildflowers. Despite her anxiety, Karen found herself starting to relax. The forest was beautiful, the air crisp and invigorating. Maybe this hike was a good idea after all. But then, as they rounded a bend in the trail, Karen's blood ran cold. There, in the soft dirt, was another massive paw print. Tom, she hissed, grabbing his arm. Look. Tom's eyes widened as he saw the print. Kids, come back here, now, he called, his voice tight with controlled panic. Emily and Max scampered back, confused by the sudden change in mood. What's wrong, Dad? Emily asked. Nothing, sweetie, Tom lied smoothly. We're just going to turn back now. I think I left something important at the cabin. As they hurried back down the trail, Karen's earlier calm evaporated. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every shadow between the trees seemed to hide a lurking predator. She gripped Max's hand tightly, ignoring his protests. Mom, you're squishing my fingers, he whined. Sorry, honey, Karen murmured, loosening her grip slightly but not letting go. I just want to make sure you stay close. The return trip seemed to take an eternity, with Karen jumping at every sound. When the cabin finally came into view, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Once inside, Tom turned to the kids. Why don't you two go play a board game in your room for a bit? Mom and I need to talk. After the children had gone upstairs, Tom turned to Karen, his face grave. We can't stay here, Karen. It's not safe. Karen nodded, relief flooding through her at his words. I know, but how do we tell the kids? They were so excited about this trip. As they discussed their options, a low, rumbling growl suddenly echoed from outside. Karen froze, her eyes locking with Tom's in shared terror. Was that? She whispered. Tom nodded grimly. I think so. Stay here. I'm going to check it out. No, Karen hissed, grabbing his arm. Are you crazy? You can't go out there. But Tom was already moving towards the door, bear spray in hand. I'll be careful. I just want to see if I can spot it. Maybe it's moving away from the cabin. Karen watched, her heart in her throat, as Tom stepped out onto the porch. He scanned the tree line, his body tense. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, Tom's body stiffened. Karen, he called, his voice barely above a whisper. Call the ranger. Now. As Karen fumbled for her phone, she saw it. A massive shape moving through the trees at the edge of the clearing. Brown fur, hulking shoulders. It was the biggest bear she'd ever seen. With shaking hands, she dialed the ranger station. Hello? This is Karen Langley. We need help. There's a grizzly bear right outside our cabin. The next few hours passed in a blur of tension and fear. The family huddled together in the living room, away from the windows, waiting for help to arrive. The kids, picking up on their parents' anxiety, were uncharacteristically quiet. When Ranger Holbrook finally arrived, the relief was palpable, but his grim expression quickly dampened their hope. "I'm afraid I have some bad news," he said after inspecting the area around the cabin. "This grizzly seems to have claimed this territory as its own. It's not showing any signs of moving on." "What does that mean for us?" Tom asked, his arm protectively around Karen's shoulders. Ranger Holbrook sighed. "It means it's not safe for you to stay here. I'm going to have to ask you to pack up and leave. We'll be closing this area of the park until we can safely relocate the bear." As they packed their belongings, a heavy silence fell over the family. The excitement of their vacation had been replaced by a lingering sense of dread. That night, as they drove away from the cabin, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that they had narrowly escaped disaster. The image of that massive bear moving through the trees would haunt her dreams for months to come. Little did she know, their encounter with the grizzly was far from over. The worst was yet to come, and it would change their lives forever. The morning sun filtered through the cabin windows, casting a deceptively peaceful glow over the living room. Karen Langley stood by the kitchen counter, clutching her coffee mug, her eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the porch. The events of the previous day, the paw print on the trail, the growl, the hulking shape moving through the trees, had left her on edge despite Ranger Holbrook's assurances. "Mom, can we please play outside today?" Max's voice broke through her reverie. "We've been stuck inside forever." Karen turned to see her children, Max and Emily, looking up at her with pleading eyes. She hesitated, torn between her instinct to keep them safe and the desire to let them enjoy their vacation. Tom appeared in the doorway, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "What's the verdict, Carr? Think it's safe for some outdoor time?" Karen bit her lip, considering. The ranger had said the bear was likely just passing through and they hadn't seen or heard anything since yesterday afternoon. Maybe it had moved on? "All right," she said finally, forcing a smile. "But we stay close to the cabin. Okay? No wandering off." The kids cheered, racing to put on their shoes. As they bounded out onto the porch, Karen felt a knot of anxiety form in her stomach. "I'll keep an eye on them," Tom assured her, squeezing her shoulder as he passed. "Try to relax a bit, hun." Karen nodded but couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She stepped out onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking beneath her feet. The forest seemed quiet, too quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just an eerie stillness that set her nerves on edge. Emily and Max were engrossed in a game of tag, their laughter echoing across the clearing. Tom sat on the porch steps, sipping his coffee and occasionally calling out to the kids to stay within sight. Karen was just starting to relax when it happened. A blood-curdling roar shattered the morning calm, sending birds scattering from the treetops. Karen's head snapped up, her heart stopping as she saw an enormous grizzly bear charging out of the forest towards her children. "Max, Emily, run!" she screamed, her body moving before her mind could process what was happening. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Karen saw Tom leap to his feet, coffee mug shattering on the porch. She saw the terror in her children's eyes as they turned and saw the bear, massive and terrifying, closing the distance with frightening speed. Karen's legs felt like lead as she raced towards her children. "Get inside. Now!" she yelled, her voice raw with fear. Emily, the closest to the cabin, made it to the porch first, scrambling up the steps. Max, however, had been further away when the bear appeared. He ran as fast as his little legs could carry him, but the bear was gaining. Karen reached her son just as the bear closed in. With strength born of desperation, she scooped Max into her arms and sprinted for the cabin door. "Karen, hurry!" Tom's panicked voice spurred her on. She could hear the bear's heavy breathing, feel the ground shake with each of its massive strides. The cabin door seemed impossibly far away. With a final burst of speed, Karen reached the porch. She practically threw Max through the open door, where Tom caught him and pulled him inside. "Karen, come on!" Tom shouted, reaching for her. But as Karen turned to enter the cabin, she felt a searing pain explode in her right calf. The bear's teeth sank into her flesh, its hot breath on her skin. Karen screamed in agony, her hands scrabbling for purchase on the doorframe. Tom grabbed her arms, pulling with all his might. "Let go of her, you bastard!" Tom roared, kicking at the bear's snout. Whether it was the kick or sheer luck, the bear suddenly released its grip. Karen fell forward into the cabin and Tom slammed the door shut behind her. The cabin shook as the bear threw its weight against the door, wood splintering under the assault. Tom braced himself against it, his face pale with exertion and fear. The gun safe, Karen gasped through the pain, pointing to a cabinet in the corner. The combination, 6241. Emily, tears streaming down her face, ran to the cabinet and fumbled with the lock. After what seemed like an eternity, she got it open and pulled out a shotgun. "Bring it here." "Sweetie?" Tom called, his voice strained as he struggled to hold the door. "And the shells. Hurry." As Emily brought the gun, Max huddled in the corner, his small body shaking with silent sobs. Karen dragged herself across the floor, leaving a trail of blood to comfort him. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, pulling him close despite the searing pain in her leg. "We're going to be okay." Tom loaded the shotgun with trembling hands. "When I open the door," he said, his voice eerily calm, "I want you all to run for the car. No matter what happens, don't stop. Understand?" Karen nodded, struggling to her feet. The pain was excruciating, but adrenaline kept her moving. She gathered Max in her arms while Emily clung to her side. "Ready?" Tom asked, his hand on the doorknob. 1, 2, 3. He flung the door open and fired the shotgun into the air. The deafening blast was followed by an enraged roar from the bear, which had been circling the porch. "Go! Now!" Tom yelled, firing another warning shot. Karen stumbled down the porch steps, half carrying, half dragging the children with her. Each step sent waves of agony through her injured leg, but she pushed through it, focused solely on reaching the car. Behind them, she could hear Tom shouting and firing the shotgun, keeping the bear at bay. As they reached the car, Karen fumbled for the keys in her pocket, her bloody hands slipping on the smooth metal. Come on," she muttered, finally managing to unlock the doors. She shoved the kids into the back seat and climbed into the driver's side. As she started the engine, she saw Tom running towards them, the bear hot on his heels. He dove into the passenger seat just as Karen floored the accelerator. The SUV's tires spun in the gravel before finding purchase. They sped down the driveway, the bear's roars fading behind them. As they reached the main road, Karen finally let out the breath she'd been holding. They were alive, they had survived. But as the adrenaline began to wear off, the pain in her leg returned with a vengeance. She looked down to see blood soaking through her jeans. "Tom," she said, her voice weak. I think I need a hospital." As Tom took the wheel and Karen slipped into shock, one thought kept running through her mind. Would anyone believe what had just happened to them? The bear attack was over, but their ordeal was far from finished. Blood pooled around Karen's leg as she slumped in the passenger seat of the SUV, her vision blurring at the edges. The adrenaline that had fueled her escape was fading fast, replaced by waves of searing pain radiating from her calf. "Tom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine's roar and the children's muffled sobs from the back seat. "I don't feel so good." Tom glanced over, his face pale with fear. "Just hang on, car, we're almost to the ranger station. Sure. They'll have first aid supplies there." Karen nodded weakly, fighting to stay conscious. She could hear Max and Emily whimpering in the back, and she wanted desperately to comfort them, to tell them everything would be okay. But she couldn't find the strength to form the words. The SUV skidded to a stop in front of the ranger station, gravel crunching under the tires. Tom leaped out, shouting for help before rushing to Karen's side of the car. "Help! We need help!" he yelled, easing Karen out of the vehicle. "There's been a bear attack!" Ranger Holbrook burst out of the station, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. "Good Lord," he muttered, rushing to assist Tom. "Let's get her inside. I've got a first aid kit." As they half-carried, half-dragged Karen into the station, she could hear the children crying, their voices mixing with the bear's furious growls echoing in her memory. "The kids," she mumbled, trying to turn her head. "Are the kids okay?" "They're fine, honey," Tom assured her, his voice tight with worry. "Not a scratch on them, thanks to you." Inside the station, they laid Karen on a cot. The ranger quickly cut away the blood-soaked fabric of her jeans, revealing the full extent of the injury. Karen heard Tom's sharp intake of breath and knew it must be bad. "I'm calling for a medevac," Ranger Holbrook said, his voice calm but urgent. "This is beyond what we can handle here." As the ranger made the call, Tom knelt beside Karen, gripping her hand tightly. "You're going to be okay, Car," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "You hear me? You're going to be just fine." Karen tried to nod, but the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through her body. She gritted her teeth, fighting back a scream. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. The ranger returned with bandages and antiseptic, working quickly to clean and dress the wound. Karen bit down on a rolled-up towel, muffling her cries of pain as the antiseptic stung her open flesh. "The helicopter's on its way," Ranger Holbrook announced. "Should be here in about 15 minutes." Tom nodded gratefully, then turned to where Max and Emily huddled in the corner, their eyes wide with fear. "It's okay, kids," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mom's going to be fine. The doctors are going to take good care of her." Emily, always the braver of the two, stepped forward hesitantly. "Mom?" she called, her voice small and trembling. Karen forced her eyes open, managing a weak smile. "Hey, sweetie," she whispered. "It's okay. I'm okay." Max, emboldened by his sister, moved closer as well. Did the bear hurt you bad, Mom?" Karen exchanged a glance with Tom, unsure how to answer. Tom knelt down, pulling both children into a hug. "Mom's leg is hurt," he explained gently, "but the doctors are going to fix her up. She was very brave, protecting you both." As the family huddled together, waiting for the medevac to arrive, Karen felt a strange mix of emotions wash over her. Relief that her children were safe, pain from her injury, and a growing sense of unreality. Had this nightmare really happened? The distant thrum of helicopter blades broke through her thoughts. Moments later, 2 paramedics burst into the station, equipment in hand. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" one of them asked, kneeling beside Karen. "I'm Jake, and this is my partner, Sarah. We're going to take care of you, okay?" Karen nodded weakly as they began assessing her vitals and examining her wound. Their voices faded in and out as they worked, discussing blood loss and potential nerve damage in hushed tones. "We need to get her to the hospital now," Sarah announced, turning to Tom. "Are you her husband? You can ride with us if you'd like." Tom looked torn, glancing between Karen and the children. Ranger Holbrook stepped forward. "I can look after the kids," he offered. "Bring them to the hospital once we've secured the area." With a grateful nod, Tom helped the paramedics load Karen onto a stretcher. As they carried her out to the waiting helicopter, Karen caught a final glimpse of her children's frightened faces. "Love you," she mouthed, trying to convey all her feelings in that silent message before the helicopter door closed. The flight to the hospital was a haze of pain and noise. Karen drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of Tom holding her hand and the paramedics working over her. When they finally landed at the hospital, everything became a whirlwind of activity. Doctors and nurses swarmed around her, calling out orders and medical jargon she couldn't understand. "Bear attack victim. Severe lacerations to the right calf. Possible muscle and nerve damage. Start an IV. We need to get fluids in her. Prep or 2. We need to clean this wound thoroughly." As they wheeled her towards the operating room, Karen felt a moment of panic. She gripped Tom's hand tightly. "Don't leave me," she pleaded. Tom leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Never," he promised. "I'll be right here when you wake up." The last thing Karen saw before the anesthesia took hold was Tom's worried face, his lips moving in what she assumed was a prayer. Hours later, Karen slowly blinked awake, the sterile smell of the hospital filling her nostrils. Tom was there just as he'd promised, slumped in a chair beside her bed. "Tom?" she croaked, her throat dry and scratchy. He jerked awake, relief flooding his features. "Hey, you're awake," he said softly, reaching for her hand. "How are you feeling?" Karen took a moment to assess. Her leg throbbed dully, but the pain was muted, likely thanks to whatever medication they had her on. "Alive," she finally answered. "The kids? They're fine," Tom assured her. "Ranger Holbrook brought them by earlier. They're at the hotel now with my sister. She flew in as soon as I called her." Karen nodded, relieved. Then, a thought struck her. "Tom," she said urgently, "we need to tell someone. About the bear. It's still out there. It could hurt someone else." Tom squeezed her hand. "I already spoke to the rangers and the local authorities. They're organizing a search party to track the bear. Just then, a police officer appeared in the doorway, notepad in hand. Mrs. Langley, I'm Officer Davis. If you're feeling up to it, I'd like to take your statement about the incident. As Karen recounted the terrifying events at the cabin, she could see the skepticism growing in the officer's eyes. When she finished, he cleared his throat awkwardly. Mrs. Langley, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, he began, his tone carefully neutral. But are you certain it was a grizzly bear? They're extremely rare in this part of Colorado. Karen felt a flash of anger. I know what I saw, she insisted. It was huge, much bigger than a black bear. Ask Ranger Holbrook, he saw the tracks. Officer Davis made a non-committal noise, jotting something in his notepad. We'll certainly investigate fully, he assured her, though his tone suggested he was merely humoring her. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Langley. I hope you recover quickly. As the officer left, Karen turned to Tom, frustration evident in her voice. He didn't believe me, did he? Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's a pretty incredible story, Carr. But don't worry. The truth will come out when they find the bear. But as Karen settled back against her pillows, doubt began to creep in. What if they didn't find the bear? What if no one believed their story? The attack had been so sudden, so surreal. Would anyone really understand what they'd been through? For the first time since the attack, Karen felt truly alone. The physical wounds would heal, but she realized that the aftermath of this ordeal was far from over. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room made Karen squint as she slowly regained consciousness. The dull throb in her leg was a constant reminder of the ordeal she had survived. As her eyes adjusted to the brightness, she saw Tom slumped in a chair beside her bed, his face etched with worry and exhaustion. Tom? Karen croaked, her throat dry and scratchy. Tom jerked awake, relief flooding his features. Karen, you're awake. How are you feeling? Before she could answer, a doctor entered the room, clipboard in hand. Good morning, Mrs. Langley. I'm Dr. Patel. How are we doing today? Karen tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through her leg. I've been better, she managed, attempting a weak smile. Dr. Patel nodded sympathetically. That's to be expected. You've been through quite an ordeal. I'm here to discuss your injuries and the treatment plan moving forward. As the doctor explained the extent of the damage to her leg, deep lacerations, muscle trauma, and potential nerve damage, Karen found her mind drifting. The clinical description of her wounds seemed at odds with the vivid, terrifying memories of the attack that kept flashing through her mind. Mrs. Langley, are you following? Dr. Patel's voice snapped her back to the present. Yes, sorry, Karen mumbled. It's a lot to take in. The doctor's expression softened. Of course, it's normal to feel overwhelmed. We'll be starting you on a course of antibiotics to prevent infection, and you'll need extensive physical therapy to regain full use of your leg. But with time and hard work, we expect you to make a good recovery. As Dr. Patel left the room, Tom took Karen's hand in his. See? You're going to be okay, Carr. We'll get through this together. Karen nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her. The kids? She asked, suddenly anxious. Are they all right? They're fine, Tom assured her. A bit shaken up, but not a scratch on them. My sister's looking after them at the hotel. They can't wait to see you. Just then, a police officer appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Langley, I'm Officer Martinez. If you're feeling up to it, I'd like to take your statement about the incident. Karen took a deep breath, steeling herself. As she recounted the events at the cabin, the massive bear charging from the forest, the frantic race to safety, the searing pain as the bear's teeth sank into her leg, she could see the doubt creeping into the officer's eyes. Mrs. Langley, Officer Martinez said carefully when she had finished. I understand this was a traumatic experience, but are you certain it was a grizzly bear? They're extremely rare in this part of Colorado. Karen felt a flash of frustration. I know what I saw, she insisted. It was huge, much bigger than a black bear. Ask Ranger Holbrook, he saw the tracks. The officer made a non-committal noise, jotting something in his notebook. We'll certainly investigate fully. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Langley. I hope you recover quickly. As Officer Martinez left, Karen turned to Tom, her voice tight with anger and disbelief. He didn't believe me. Why doesn't anyone believe me? Tom squeezed her hand reassuringly. It's a pretty incredible story, Car, but don't worry. The truth will come out when they find the bear. But as the days passed and Karen began her grueling physical therapy sessions, doubt began to creep in. What if they didn't find the bear? What if no one ever believed their story? The nightmares started a week into her hospital stay. Karen would wake up in a cold sweat, the bear's roar echoing in her ears, phantom pain shooting through her leg. More than once, Tom had to calm her down, holding her as she sobbed into his shoulder. "It's okay, Car," he would murmur, stroking her hair. "You're safe now. It can't hurt you anymore." But Karen wasn't so sure. Even as her physical wounds began to heal, she could feel the psychological scars taking root. During one particularly difficult physical therapy session, Karen's frustration boiled over. "What's the point of all this?" she snapped at her therapist, a kind-faced woman named Sarah. "Even if I can walk normally again, it won't change what happened. It won't make people believe me." Sarah paused, studying Karen's face. "Mrs. Langley, have you considered talking to someone? A therapist, I mean. It's clear you're dealing with more than just physical trauma." Karen bristled at first, but as the words sank in, she felt a wave of relief. Maybe talking to someone would help. Maybe they would believe her. The day Karen was discharged from the hospital, a local news crew was waiting outside. "Mrs. Langley," a reporter called out, as Tom helped her into a wheelchair. "Can you tell us about the bear attack? How do you respond to claims that grizzly bears aren't native to this area?" Karen froze, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Tom stepped in, shielding her from the cameras. "No comment," he said firmly, pushing her wheelchair towards their waiting car. As they drove home, Karen stared out the window, lost in thought. The familiar streets of Boulder seemed different somehow, as if the entire world had shifted on its axis. "What are we going to do, Tom?" she asked quietly. "How do we just go back to normal after this?" Tom reached over, taking her hand. "One day at a time, Car. We'll figure it out together." That night, as Karen lay in her own bed for the first time since the attack, she found herself unable to sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside her window, sent her heart racing. She could almost smell the musty scent of the cabin, hear the bear's heavy breathing. Grabbing her phone from the nightstand, she found herself scrolling through news articles about the attack. Most were skeptical, citing the rarity of grizzly bears in the area. Some even suggested that the Langleys had fabricated or exaggerated the story for attention. Tears of frustration welled up in Karen's eyes. How could they not believe her? The pain in her leg was real. The terror she felt was real. The bear had been real. As dawn broke, Karen made a decision. She wouldn't let this define her. She wouldn't let the doubters win. Somehow, she would find a way to tell her story, to make people understand the danger that still lurked in those mountains. With newfound determination, Karen began to plan. She would reach out to wildlife experts, gather evidence, do whatever it took to prove that the grizzly bear was real. And in doing so, she hoped she might finally begin to heal, not just her body, but her mind and spirit as well. The road to recovery would be long and difficult, but Karen Langley was ready to face it head-on. The bear may have left its mark on her, but it hadn't broken her. Not by a long shot. Karen Langley sat in the dimly lit waiting area of the local radio station, her palms sweating as she clutched a folder filled with notes and printed articles. It had been 6 weeks since the bear attack, and while her physical wounds were healing, the emotional scars remained raw and painful. "Mrs. Langley?" A young intern poked her head around the corner. "They're ready for you now." Karen nodded, taking a deep breath as she stood, her newly healed leg still a bit unsteady. She followed the intern down a narrow hallway, the smell of coffee and electronics filling her nostrils. "Just through here," the intern said, gesturing to a door marked Studio 3. "Good luck." As Karen entered the studio, she was greeted by the sight of microphones, soundproofing panels, and a friendly-faced man who introduced himself as Jack Holloway, the host of Mountain Mornings. "Mrs. Langley, welcome to the show," Jack said. shaking her hand. "We're glad you could join us today to share your story." Karen managed a small smile. "Thank you for having me, Jack. I appreciate the opportunity." As they settled into their seats and donned headphones, Karen could feel her heart racing. This was her chance to tell her story, to warn others about the dangers lurking in the wilderness. But would anyone believe her? The on-air light flickered to life and Jack's voice took on a more professional tone. "Good morning, Colorado. We're here today with Karen Langley, a local mother who claims to have survived a grizzly bear attack in Rocky Mountain National Park. Karen, can you tell us what happened that day?" Karen leaned towards the microphone, her voice shaky but determined. "It was supposed to be a family vacation, a chance to enjoy nature with my husband and kids. But it turned into a nightmare when a massive grizzly bear charged out of the forest towards us." As she recounted the terrifying events, the bear's roar, the frantic race to safety, the searing pain as its teeth sank into her leg, Karen could hear the skepticism creeping into Jack's voice. "That's quite a story, Karen," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "But I have to ask, are you certain it was a grizzly bear? Wildlife experts say they're extremely rare in this part of Colorado." Karen felt a flash of frustration. "I know what I saw, Jack. It was far too big to be a black bear. And Ranger Holbrook saw the tracks. He can confirm their size." "We reached out to Ranger Holbrook," Jack replied. "He confirmed seeing large tracks, but couldn't definitively say they were from a grizzly." Karen's heart sank. Even the ranger was hedging his bets now. As the interview continued, calls started coming in from listeners. Some were sympathetic, but many were skeptical or even hostile. "I've been hiking these mountains for 30 years, one caller said gruffly. "Never seen a grizzly. Lady's probably just stirring up trouble for attention." "Maybe it was a big black bear," another suggested. "Easy to misjudge size when you're scared." With each doubtful comment, Karen felt her resolve weakening. She had come here to warn people, to share her story. But it seemed like no one was truly listening. "Karen," Jack said, his voice softening slightly, "I can tell this experience was traumatic for you, but given the lack of concrete evidence, how can you be so sure about what you saw?" Karen took a deep breath, fighting back tears of frustration. "I understand the skepticism, Jack. I do. But I know what I experienced. The terror, the pain, it was all real. And while I can't prove it was a grizzly, I can say with absolute certainty that there's a dangerous predator out there. I just want other families to be aware and stay safe." As the interview wrapped up, Karen felt drained. She had hoped this would bring closure, that sharing her story would somehow make it easier to bear. Instead, she felt more alone than ever. Leaving the studio, Karen checked her phone to find it buzzing with notifications. Her story had sparked a heated debate online, with comments ranging from supportive to downright cruel. "Attention-seeking mom needs a reality check," one comment read. "Poor woman probably hallucinated from the pain," said another. But among the negativity, there were a few supportive messages. "I believe you, Karen. Stay strong. Whether it was a grizzly or not, bears are dangerous. Thanks for the warning." As Karen scrolled through the comments, she felt a mix of emotions: gratitude for the supportive few, anger at the doubters, and a deep, aching sadness that her traumatic experience was being picked apart and questioned by strangers. That evening, as she sat on her back porch watching the sun set over the distant mountains, Tom joined her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "How you holding up, Car?" he asked gently. Karen sighed, leaning into his touch. "I don't know, Tom. I thought talking about it would help, but now I just feel exposed, raw. Like my pain is on display for everyone to judge and criticize." Tom nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You did a brave thing, sharing your story. It's not your fault if some people aren't ready to hear it. But what if they're right?" Karen whispered, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at her. "What if I did imagine it? What if it wasn't a grizzly?" Tom knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Karen, look at me. I was there. I saw that bear. Maybe we can't prove it was a grizzly, but we know it was big and it was dangerous. Your warning could save lives, even if people don't believe every detail." Karen nodded, feeling a small spark of resolve reignite within her. "You're right. Even if no one else believes me, I know what happened." and I won't stop trying to make people understand the dangers out there." As night fell, Karen traced the scars on her leg, the only physical proof of her encounter. They were fading now, but she knew the memory of that day would stay with her forever. She may not have found the closure she was looking for, but Karen realized that sharing her story, despite the doubt and criticism, was a step towards healing. It was a way of reclaiming her narrative, of refusing to let fear and skepticism silence her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new doubts to face. But for now, Karen allowed herself to find comfort in the quiet of the evening, in Tom's unwavering support, and in the knowledge that, believed or not, she had survived. And that in itself was a victory worth holding on to. Months had passed since the bear attack, and the Langley family found themselves once again driving up the familiar gravel road to their cabin in Rocky Mountain National Park. The rhythmic crunch of tires on loose stones filled the car, a sound that once brought excitement but now carried an undercurrent of anxiety. Karen sat rigid in the passenger seat, her eyes constantly scanning the tree line. Every shadow, every movement caught her attention, sending her heart racing. Tom reached over and squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You okay, Car?" he asked softly. She nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just hyper-aware, I guess." In the back seat, Emily and Max were unusually quiet, their usual excitement for the cabin tempered by the memory of their last visit. As they rounded the final bend and the cabin came into view, Karen felt a knot form in her stomach. Tom parked the car and turned to face the family. "All right, team. We're here. Remember, we're being extra cautious this time. No wandering off and we stay together, okay?" The kids nodded solemnly and Karen felt a pang of guilt. They shouldn't have to be afraid of nature, she thought. But then again, a healthy respect for its dangers wasn't a bad thing. As they unloaded the car, Karen's hand kept drifting to the canister of bear spray on her hip. Its weight was both comforting and a constant reminder of why they needed it. "Mom?" Max's voice broke through her thoughts. "Can we play outside? Please?" Karen hesitated, her instinct screaming to keep them indoors. But she knew they couldn't spend the entire trip cowering inside. "All right," she said finally. "But you stay where I can see you from the porch, no exceptions." As the kids ran off to play, Karen settled into a chair on the porch, her eyes constantly scanning the area. Tom joined her, handing her a steaming mug of coffee. "It's beautiful out here," he said, gesturing to the stunning mountain vista before them. "Try to enjoy it a little, okay?" Karen nodded, taking a sip of coffee. She had to admit the view was breathtaking. The snow-capped peaks in the distance, the lush green forest, the clear blue sky. It was easy to see why they had fallen in love with this place. As the day wore on, Karen found herself gradually relaxing. The kids played happily, their laughter echoing across the clearing. Tom busied himself with small repairs around the cabin. It was almost normal. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Karen felt her anxiety spike again. "Time to come in, kids," she called, perhaps a bit too sharply. As they gathered in the cabin for dinner, Karen couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every creak of the old wooden structure, every rustle of leaves outside, set her on edge. "Mom?" Emily's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you scared the bear will come back?" Karen exchanged a glance with Tom before answering carefully. "I'm just being cautious, sweetie. It's important to respect nature and be aware of our surroundings." After dinner, as they settled in for the night, Karen found herself double-checking every lock, peering out of every window. Tom watched her with a mix of concern and understanding. "Car," he said gently, "We're safe. The rangers have been monitoring the area. There haven't been any bear sightings in months." Karen nodded, but couldn't quite bring herself to relax. "I know. I can't help it." As she lay in bed that night, sleep eluded her. Every sound from outside seemed amplified. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through the trees, the scurrying of small animals. In her mind, each noise transformed into the heavy footsteps of an approaching bear. Just as she was finally drifting off, a loud crack from outside jolted her awake. Karen sat bolt upright, her heart pounding. "Tom," she whispered urgently, shaking her husband awake. "Did you hear that?" Tom blinked groggily. "Hear what?" Another crack, louder this time. Karen was out of bed in an instant, moving to the window. In the pale moonlight, she could make out the shapes of the trees at the edge of the clearing. And there, between two pines, she saw movement. "There's something out there," she hissed. Tom joined her at the window, squinting into the darkness. "I don't see anything, Carr." But Karen was certain. A large, dark shape was moving through the trees. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be? "I'm going to check on the kids," she said, her voice trembling slightly. As she crept down the hallway, Karen's mind raced. Should they call the Rangers? Try to leave? What if it was just her imagination playing tricks on her? She peeked into the kids' room, relieved to find them sleeping peacefully. As she turned to go back to bed, a floorboard creaked under her foot, and she froze. In the silence that followed, Karen strained her ears. And then she heard it. A low, rumbling sound from outside. A sound she'd never forget. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. It couldn't be. Not again. She rushed back to the bedroom where Tom was still peering out the window. "Tom," she whispered urgently. "I heard it. The bear. It's out there." Tom turned to her, his expression a mix of concern and doubt. "Karen, are you sure?" It could have been anything. The wind, a deer. But Karen was already moving, grabbing the bear spray from the nightstand. "We need to be ready, just in case." They spent the rest of the night in tense silence, taking turns watching out the window. But as dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, there was no sign of the bear or any large animal. As they sat on the porch the next morning watching the kids play, Tom turned to Karen. "You okay?" "Last night was pretty intense." Karen sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know, Tom. Part of me knows I might be overreacting, seeing danger where there isn't any. But another part, I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there." Tom nodded, understanding in his eyes, understanding in his, "It's okay to be cautious, Carr. What you went through, what we all went through, it's not something you just get over. But we can't let fear control us either." As she watched her children laugh and play, Karen felt a surge of determination. They had survived once. They were stronger now, more prepared. Whatever was out there, bear or no bear, they would face it together. "You're right," she said, squeezing Tom's hand. "We can't let fear win, but we can be smart. Be prepared." As the day progressed, Karen found herself relaxing bit by bit. The forest, which had seemed so menacing the night before, now looked peaceful in the warm sunlight. The birds sang, the leaves rustled gently in the breeze, and her family was safe and happy. That evening, as she locked up the cabin, Karen caught her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her looked tired, a bit haunted, but also resilient. The bear attack had changed her, there was no denying that. But it hadn't broken her. As she turned away from the window, Karen made a silent promise to herself. She would always be vigilant, always be prepared. But she wouldn't let fear rob her family of the joy they found in this beautiful place. The bear, real or imagined, might still be out there. But so was she, Karen Langley. Survivor, protector, and now, more than ever, a force to be reckoned with.